Okay, I'm going to call this meeting to order. This is the Planning Board meeting of February 20th, 2024. The first item on the agenda is the introduction of Planning Board members. I'll start over at my left, Steve Webster, who is an alternate. Sitting next to Steve is Von Dugan, and then Peter Goodwin, and Roger Parent. And Doug Braskin is the vice chairman of the Planning Board. And then to my right, Brad Harriman, who is the representative from the Board of Selectmen, and Julie Jacobs, who is an alternate. My name is Kathy Barnard. So we don't have any public hearings tonight, but we do have a whole list of discussion items. And really what I hope we're going to do is come up with some specifics that we want to deal with in 2024 and come up with some dates so that we can start moving along here. So, but the first item on the agenda is the road construction regulations. This is under the purview of the Planning Board. And Tavis, would you like to go through the changes? This hasn't been changed in quite some time. And I know we've had already we've had another meeting on it previously, but people may have forgotten what the changes are that you're proposing, or that you and Steve are proposing.
Yep. So it's Planning Board's request. I had the new Public Works Director, Steve Randall, and I went through the road construction regulations that were last touched in 2002, but functionally they're much older than that. And surprisingly, there weren't a lot of changes that were recommended from Public Works. The first one appears on page 7 of the current regulations, and effectively it remains the same change. It just ripples through a couple of different pages. The main change, or the basis for the change, is removing the 1 to 200 vehicle trip per day standard. So functionally on page 7, you see that is the 50-foot right-of-way, the minimum pavement width of 20 feet, minimum shoulder width of 2 feet, center of street to ditch line is 18 feet and the maximum grade of 12%. His recommendation was that that be removed in its entirety. On the understanding that most of the roads in town are operating at the 201 to 1,000 vehicle trips per day or greater standard. That then carries over onto page 8 of the current regulations. It talks about the substructure of the road, the part that you don't see but that you rely upon. Same parameter, 1 to 200 vehicle trips per day is being removed. And that extends on to page 9, removing the 20-mile-an-hour design speed, because functionally DOT doesn't let you set a speed limit below 25. So it doesn't make sense to design a road to a lower standard, particularly where you're getting rid of the 1 to 200 vehicle trip per day road. So as I mentioned in the memo, this is wholly within the Planning Board's jurisdiction. You do have to have a public hearing on it. I've suggested that your next available date where we can still meet the noticing requirement is April 2nd. For those that think I'm making this up, I do have an email from Steve Randall confirming that these are the deletions he recommended, if the board would like to see it. But with that, I can answer any questions.
Is he planning on coming to the public hearing, Steve?
Once we set a date, I can ask him to attend the meeting if people have questions on that, yes.
Okay, and will you be putting the red lines under the changes, so?
The document is actually so old, you really can't do the red line track changes. That's why I drew the red box.
Okay, so this is all a new document. Well, we probably should point that out to people.
Kathy, are we going to have a chance to make comments and stuff before the public hearing on this document and stuff?
Yes, that's what we're going to do right now.
Tonight, okay, good.
Yeah. Do you have a comment?
I have a few notes I made when I was going through this, so I
Okay.
don't know how you want to do it, if you want to
No,
go
no,
through by page or just,
yes, if you could go page by page, that would be great.
okay. First one I had was on page 2, under 3.4 street names. I noticed under 3.5, it's reference to the manual uniform traffic control devices, which is known as MUTCD. I thought that should also be mentioned in, under the street names, because the signs are going to have, the street name signs have certain criteria to follow there, which fall under the MUTCD guidelines. So I thought that should be added at some point in that 3.4 under street names. And over onto page 3, let's see. I just had one under 3.8 alleyways. The beginning of the second line after the word defined, I was just going to add the word by, B-Y.
Okay.
Be defined by the Institute for Transportation Engineers. A little further down on the driveways and other accesses, 3.11. Usually there's been a kind of a standard design that wherever a driveway intersects a roadway, that it have a negative 2% slope back about 5 feet for drainage, so that if it's a driveway sloping down toward the roadway, it doesn't push the water off the driveway out into the road. It'll come into a little bit of a swale, go off to the side before it hits the shoulder of the road. And even looking back further into the document after I was reading further, it didn't really reference that design, but that's usually on a lot of the DOT specs for intersections and stuff with their roads. They want to see a continuation of that 2% slope, or even a little steeper, 2 or 3%. So I don't know if that should be added into that verbiage somehow.
Well, doesn't it do the reference here back to the Institute of Transportation Engineer guidelines? But it says 1985, shouldn't we change that from 1985 to the most current? And
Yeah, I
maybe
was
that
going to
would
address
cover
that
it?
a little later on here. There's one, because a lot of the guidelines I looked up, I found the DOT roadway standards that they use are adopted in 2016. Remember where I saw that one. Oh, yeah, on the next page. I don't know if that 1985 one was the most current one for that actual document there. So
Probably.
whatever the board felt like on that. The next one I had was under utilities, the next one. Whether we should put it in there for a water and sewer extension application would need to be approved by the town. Depending on where we are with, build out and stuff, what we have for capacity left, especially on the sewer side. It would need to, I think it definitely has to come before the town anyway, with it. I think it should be probably mentioned in there that it needs to come before the Public Works or the Board of Selectmen to be approved for an extension.
Okay.
And on the next page, which is what, page 4, under 3.15, cut and fills, second line, let's see where it reads, finished roadbed grade. Some of the language here was a little bit strange here, so my thought was which is finished roadbed, to cross off the bed portion of that, so it would read finished road grade, and then insert finished road grade to the subgrade, cross out subgrade in the parentheses shown on the final profile. So that sentence would read, excavation of roadbeds shall consist of removing earth or ledge to a depth of 24 inches below the finished road to the subgrade shown on the final profile. Because typically the subgrade is known as the elevation that you prepare the roadbed to accept your gravel bases underneath the pavement.
Okay,
That's kind of the terminology used by, the engineers and the contractors. The way that read there, it talked about, it's a little confusing there because they talk about taking it down 24 inches below the roadbed grade, subgrade. But it's not really the subgrade. Subgrade's already should be down the 24 inches, so just kind of clarifies it a little bit.
okay,
And then later on in that same line, at the end of that same line, on the second line down, crossing off where it says i.e. below the required road base, this kind of takes care of that language there. And then about 3/4 of the way down in that same paragraph, where it talks about the ledge, we see the word ledge on the left-hand side. It says broken ledge may be used in layers and fills over 4 feet thick in thickness. I wanted to add in below the subgrade so that it's definitely defined that it's can't be within the gravel layers. It's going to be
Okay.
below that. And then continuing on the next sentence, the voids in each layer shall be filled with earth or spalls. Broken ledge shall not be placed within 2 feet. I would cross off the word below and put of, so it would read within 2 feet of the finished grade. Remove the word sub on that. So that would tell you that all that work has to be done below the subgrade there.
So you just said cross out the part that says
Right. And leave
the below grade.
leave the road grade, right. And then next slide, ledge fragments or boulders larger than 1/8 of a cubic yard shall not be used within 2 feet of the, it says the finished subgrade. Not be used within 2 feet of the finished grade ledge,
so the finished grade, not,
right,
yeah, okay,
So it's the same as the broken ledge?
yeah. Which is basically what that 1/8 of a cubic yard stuff is the broken ledge. And then at the end of this, it says the subgrade shall be at least 2 feet above the estimated seasonal high water table. In Wolfeboro, the seasonal high water table is fairly high in a lot of places, so I don't know if we wanted to add anything in there about if you're within 2 feet of the water table to install under drains in the design of the road. Have an engineer, determine the water table, and if the subgrade is within 2 feet of the water table to include under drains be installed.
okay,
And under 316 roadway grades, I'm just going to have it add in that to refer to the 2016 standards for New Hampshire Department of Transportation. And then somewhere in here, wanted to add a section for defining the gravel bases. We talk about it, those charts that Tavis just referred to, being the 14-inch, we're eliminating the 1 to 200, vehicles per day and going under the, 200 to 1,000. On page 8, it talks about, gravel and crushed gravel depths of 14 inches and 6 inches respectively. But it doesn't really define what those gravels are. If you go into the DOT specifications for gravels, that base gravel is referred to in their system as what they call 304.6, and the crushed gravel is 304.3, and that gives you the exact specifications for the sieves for the size of the aggregate, for all the different aggregates that go into that gravel, whether, the stone, the sand portions, for the gradation of the gravel for it to pass inspection. That was really, those are my comments on it.
316, you probably need to change the,
It's just a typo.
what, sixth word? Conformance rather than consonants.
Where are you talking about, Peter?
At 316,
Yeah, Peter, I believe that this document was generated by optical character recognition
fine,
from an old
well, okay,
document.
but that should be corrected.
Yeah, I agree. There are
I-
several instances like that.
Well, there is, when I started looking at this, I went back and I found this version in the file that I've been given earlier, and that corrects many of the typos. I mean, we've got here, if you look at 315, we've got imbalance. That's corrected in this. There's still a few that aren't corrected. And I have a question. Why are we increasing the width of the right-of-way from 50 to 60 feet?
That's the recommendation of the Director of Public Works.
So most of the, I don't mean to interrupt you, but most of the streets, the older streets in town are 50 feet right away or less. So now let's say you put a new road in and you've come into this new road from an old road, let's say it's a 50-foot right away with a, 16-foot width of pavement. And now you get to, let's say in this case, what we're proposing is a 60-foot right-of-way with a 22-foot width of pavement. And guess what? You're going to speed up
Yep.
and go faster. And you're never going to have the charm of the rest of the town, because now suddenly you've just put in a major road fed by lots of other more traditional New England roads. And actually, Chester Chelman, I don't know if anybody ever remembers this guy. He used to be the principal of White Mountain Survey, which is now Horizons. He wrote a brilliant paper on roadway width, pavement width, speed of traffic, and various, and I'll see if I can figure out how to find that thing, but I think we should really look at that and consider I get, if you're in, I'm just going to use a really bad example, LA, and you're creating a new neighborhood, I can see, why this volume of traffic is important, but it seems silly to me to have suddenly a really wide roadway and a really wide right-of-way if you've come off of a traditional New England 40 to 50-foot right-of-way. And I have no problem with the subgrade and the standards and making the road that will last, but making a super highway in the middle of a new subdivision that maybe has a cul-de-sac, 10 lots, or let's say it's continuous with another road or is a loop, suddenly to have a really wide roadway is just, it's an invitation for, I think, speed.
Yeah. I share Vaughn's concern. I think maybe in the 60s or early 70s, there were 40-foot rights away, but since I'm pretty sure at least the 70s, there's been a 50-foot requirement for a right-of-way width. And I think an argument can be made that, the wider the road, the faster you go.
When the former road supervisor ended up looking at the Orchards Road, he actually suggested that perhaps we should make it 2 feet narrower. And it would do two things. One, it would slow people down, and the other, it would actually cost less because you'd have to buy less pavement. But that was one of his concerns and one of the suggestions he had when there was discussion of what was going to happen in the orchards.
I also think, Vaughn, what you're talking about goes with that bit about keeping the neighborhood, the new pieces moving into the neighborhood to be like, what's the word I'm trying to look for? Like they belong together, not dissimilar, but not the same, but like they have the same flavor. And if you do that with the skinny road going into, a great big, huge, flat, beautiful new road, that's not keeping the neighborhood looking like itself.
Yeah, I think something about continuous character. And if you can't get there on a road that's that wide, what's the point? You know, I think it depends on the setting. And there should probably be some language that allows some flexibility of design. And I will try and find that paper because it's a good read by an engineer.
And probably it should be checked again with, what's the new fire truck like? Is it wider, is it bigger? I mean, is that an
Right.
issue, or is it fine for the smaller roads still?
I think the newer trucks, I believe, are 10 feet wide now.
Is that bigger or smaller?
Well, I think some of our past ones have been that wide. They used to probably be 8 feet or 8.5 feet. So I understand, Steve wanting to go from 20 feet to 22 feet so that you're not riding on the edge of the pavement and breaking down the edge of the road. But I think that's a discussion. I think it'd be good to have him here to have a discussion with him on that. And to kind of answer, I think it was Vaughn's question regarding, or maybe Roger's too, with why we're going from 50 to 60 feet. If you go to the 22 feet width in pavement, add your shoulders and your ditch line out there, and try and keep your slopes, like a 3-to-1, at least a 3-to-1, hopefully a 4-to-1 coming off the shoulder of the road. You're back that far into, by the time you get back to the properties, you're either going to have to get easements to work on people's properties to get the road installed and to maintain it. So I think that was the reasoning behind adding the 10 feet in width there anyway. But whether we want to go to 22 feet from 20 feet, I don't know. But there's a lot to what Vaughn said there about that paper. I've heard of that. I haven't read it. I think I did see it a long time ago. And it is a known fact that, a narrower road has a traffic calming effect too, on the traffic and the speed and things like that. And in your residential areas, you don't want them going fast. So
Right.
that's something we got to talk about and think about during this.
I think we've also heard comments about trees along roadsides, and if you're going to have a 60-foot right-of-way, then you're probably going to have no trees within that right-of-way.
Maybe before setting a public hearing, the board wants to invite Steve Randall.
Sounds like a good idea.
Yeah. I have some other comments. I did get this out and found there were fewer typos than in this draft, but on page 1, it refers to figure 1. There is no figure 1. That's why I got this out, to see if I could find a figure 1, but there is no figure 1. There is no figure 2 and no figure 3. And I also wondered, Brad touched on this, that have any of these documents that are referenced been updated? And if so, we should have the updated reference to them. And, I think most of the typos are corrected in this one. They're not in here. Although on page 7, and I think also on page 8, we've got the 6th edition as opposed to an edition. And also on page 7, it says that gravel roads shall be permitted for subdivisions, well, there are all sorts of typos in there, with private roads serving a maximum of 10 lots of build out. I think that's what it's supposed to say. I was not aware we were approving new subdivisions with gravel roads.
Now's the time to catch it. This is what people are allowed to do today.
And going through the various requirements here, are grade stakes being used? has it spelled out here. Brad, do you think the inspections provisions are sufficient? Because the town has gotten burned on roads that were improperly inspected.
I think the way these are written, I think they are, Roger.
Okay.
I think back in the day, from the ones that we got burned on were depending on, just strictly on staff going out at various times to take a look at the road as it's going in and stuff. I believe now we've seen here for the last quite a few years, I've been on the planning board here. All these new subdivisions we're requiring third-party inspections and reports from them before releasing, bonds and stuff like that and surety bonds. So I think these work good here, the way it's set up now. So I feel comfortable with that.
Okay, my other question on inspections is the second to last paragraph on page 6. There's a process laid out here on inspections and reporting. Is that being done?
As far as I know, no one's proposed a road since I've been here, so.
Okay. And then on page 8, 4.11, it has minimum cul-de-sac diameter, pavement diameter to center, and it's got 100 and 138 feet under that. And if that's deleted, does that mean there's no minimum cul-de-sac diameter?
It's a valid question.
Yeah.
I don't know why you would have a 100-foot and 138-foot on a 1 to 200 vehicle trip per day. I'm wondering if it's just in the wrong spot.
Well, I'm wondering the same thing.
I'm wondering if it should be the
potentially.
standard across all three.
Yeah,
Yeah.
basic.
But I will check with,
Now, if you had a road that only had 150 cars, you have no restrictions and no minimums? If we
No.
delete everything in red, or is it just putting everything into the next category? up?
putting everything into the next category was
And
the
so therefore,
recommendation.
really, the next category should be 1 to 1,000, rather than 201 to 1,000.
Correct.
So that should be changed. It's what I assumed, but,
Yeah.
Well-
unless you change the number, it means that it's dead in the water or whatever.
Correct.
But I think we need a new draft without all the typos and some of these points that have been brought up addressed before we, and maybe it would be good to meet with Steve and get his input.
I will start retyping. I'm not going to take fault for the typos that Adobe created, but I understand they need to be.
This version has a lot fewer.
Right. That was done in a program that no longer exists and does not exist. So in order to create the new draft, someone needs to sit down and retype this whole thing, which I think will address most of this.
Just curious, Tavis, what program was it created in, do you know?
I cannot find it electronically. So the only option I had was to take the clean draft that Roger's referring to, was scan it into the computer to make a digital copy, which then led to, best I can tell, just looking at the commas and periods it added together, 1,600 typos. Not to mention addition becoming addition, et cetera.
If you'd like assistance in retyping it, I'll volunteer.
It's not that. This originally started out with, where did Public Works want to go with it? And I agree with all of the comments I've heard tonight. There's a lot of things to change.
And then you check on the update on these various studies or standards that are listed to make
Correct.
sure we have the current.
For example, MUTCD just updated. It's questionable whether New Hampshire will adopt it yet or not, but I think they finally come out of 2018. So,
Again,
but there are
I guess
a number of, I don't even know if some of these studies actually, or I will come up with, let me rephrase, I will come up with the appropriate reference for those things referenced to put into this document, because some of these I don't even think exist anymore.
Yeah. I guess I have one last one, and that is under alleyways. We don't have alleyways, do we? And we don't,
Yeah, I was wondering that too.
and do we have
Where the
traditional
alleys are.
neighborhood development? We have nothing in any of the planning documents that refer to that.
Yeah, in fact, Steve leaned over and said, what's traditional neighborhood development? So I found the little planning guide that comes from sometime in the late 70s that is traditional neighborhood design, which
So
has been
actually,
modified.
Chet Sheldman had a company called TND, and I think his license plate said that, too. Yeah.
Well, this,
I would also suggest that some of it all may be simplified if we are just saying that the roads have to be DOT standard.
That's effectively what,
And so I would say, is all of this necessary if you just say DOT standard? And I don't know the answer to that. I'm just asking, can it be made simpler? And, it's there. And it would also mean that if the DOT standard got increased, then you'd end up having to deal with the increases.
correct.
If you said current DOT standard. Didn't we do that on some of the other stuff that we've done lately, that we stuck in there, current?
Update the reference as best you can, comma, as amended, yes. But yes, there might be a very simple way to do this, because this looks as though someone tried to adapt DOT language to Wolfeboro, as opposed to saying, follow that book.
But when you do have a document that's the road construction regulations, then somebody can look at it and say, does it meet the regulations? Presumably, an engineer is going to know what the DOT standards are. I certainly don't know what they are, and this does lay it out, so when you look at a plan and it has something that doesn't meet these standards, you can say that, or you can say, yeah, it meets it.
Correct.
But DOT standards very specific about the size of the gravel and all that kind of stuff that's in your road bed, and so it may be that we don't need all that, the graphing there, it's just in the standard.
Well, I'm a fan of including it in the local regulations so that people have it in front of them without going on Google search or someplace else.
Put it in as addendum.
anybody else? Will this affect any of our subdivision? Okay.
I just want to say that.
Well, I mean, not directly. So if Horizons or Norway Plains were to come in with a subdivision with a new road on it, brass tack level, the board would be looking for a 60-foot right-of-way. And then the condition would be built to the road construction regulations, which is effectively DOT standard. So that means a lot of things to engineers that currently they could come in and propose a 50-foot right-of-way. Now, the board, during the subdivision review process, could say, look, we understand you're doing the 60-foot right-of-way. We understand that you're putting X, Y, and Z utility easements on this side or that side. You're doing under drains for X, Y, and Z. We'd like to see trees in the right-of-way. We'd like to see streetlights. I mean, one of the reasons for looking for the bigger right-of-way from a planner's perspective is maybe the town adopts a sidewalk protocol in the future, and there's no right-of-way for sidewalks. It could be that Steve is looking at the wider right-of-way to get the extra shoulder width so that you have more bike ped possibility.
Yeah.
It's not all to provide a drag strip. And just because you have 22 feet of pavement versus 20 feet of pavement doesn't mean the white line is hanging off the edge of the pavement either. You can still have narrow lanes in the traffic calming with more pavement. Maybe there's a reason to not have 22 feet of pavement in a certain area because you're doing some innovative stormwater treatment or something like that. But without the right-of-way is one of the most expensive things to go looking for later. I think Brad found that out recently.
Can I just say, I don't think Steve did anything but answer the questions that he was asked. So all this stuff that we came up with, I have a feeling he just wasn't really kind of asked that question. He just looked at
Correct.
the things to change that he thought were
Yeah,
like, oh, yeah, those
He
things
looked at
changed.
it and said, that standard does not work.
Yeah.
I don't think he necessarily went through with a fine-tooth comb and wondered about minimum cul-de-sac diameter.
No.
Okay, but.
We all took a swing at
He
it.
probably should. Did you folks, before this comes to a public hearing, did you want Steve to come so that he could answer some of these
I think
questions?
he's going to have to come at least once,
Yeah, I
yeah.
think it would be useful to have him come once before the
Yeah.
public hearing.
I
Right.
agree.
Because he could read one of these things after we've, rehashed it and go, are you crazy? That's not what that should say. I mean, that's his business, not ours.
Okay, can we see if we can,
Sure, I'll see if I can get him here for the March work session, and
Oh,
we'll
okay,
hold off
and-
setting a public hearing until after that.
yeah, right, yeah.
I have one more point, Kathy, if I may. Page 9, 4.19, street lighting. End of that paragraph, it talks about full spectrum lighting, whatever that means. There was talk this year about the lighting around Hunters and the color of the lighting and the lumens and so forth. So I think we should look at that
I think full spectrum is,
character of the town as well as safety and so forth.
Okay, yeah, good point.
Steve, I think you missed that whole lighting section that was going on last year.
yeah, I think full spectrum is the color of the light, but what it doesn't say is anything about full cutoff lighting.
Does this meet our current lighting standards?
Well, it's a fun question. Do the lighting standards apply to streetlights?
If they're in a subdivision, why wouldn't they?
Maybe we
They
should
would
have,
apply at the time of subdivision. I don't know if they'd apply if it became a town road. We don't really talk in the lighting regulations about full spectrum lighting, but we talk about full cutoff lighting.
Didn't we also talk about the color of the lighting?
Well, that's what
Sure.
spectrum refers to, is the color.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
What John was, with his, 12 pages of the different lighting colors, we need to lean towards the left to the yellow and not to the right to the blue.
would it be worthwhile to have Barry take a look at this? from the
I was
electric-
thinking it'd be even easier. Last sentence, residential subdivision lighting shall be of a pedestrian scale, maximum height of 15 feet, and comply with the lighting provisions of the town of Wolfeboro. And just be done with it. I'll put the right section in there, not some
okay.
random lighting regulation.
I guess to go along with that, Tavis, modern streetlights don't have light bulbs.
So how old are the regulations? Let's figure this one out.
Okay, so are you all pretty much set then until we can then meet with Steve?
Yep.
Okay?
I'll coordinate that best I can and get an updated draft so that everyone's talking about
Okay,
the
and
same
if it,
thing.
if it requires you moving the public hearing, that would be fine too.
We didn't schedule it yet, so
Yeah,
we're good.
okay. All right. Okay, on the agenda is a list of pending items that we went over pretty quickly at the last meeting. One of the items that came up was some of the items that we had looked at in the previous year. And does anyone have any interest in revisiting some of those items or not?
Yes.
I'll put my no vote in. I think we should do the C2 district removal, which is fairly simple. I think we should, I went back and looked at the conservation subdivision and where we left off, and I think there were some changes to be made after the December 15th, I believe it was, iteration, and maybe the committee could get together and finalize that and bring that to the board for the board's consideration.
So you want to have another committee meeting? Is that what you're saying, Roger?
Yeah, I had I've had a December 15th version, and I had some handwritten notes on it, so I'm not sure whether that got incorporated, but maybe if the four of us got together and went over it one last time, we could get a finished product, at least as far as we were concerned, to the board.
I have one dated December 21st.
Tavis, and basically what they're talking about are the corrections that came up at the last time. Could we get the committee together again one time before bringing this back to the planning board?
The latest draft I have is the 1221 version, which I believe has the comments from the previous, but if that didn't get to Roger, then I could send that out. We can decide if we have another meeting before it comes back.
Yeah, for whatever reason, I don't seem to have that.
I do happen to know that the Orchards subdivision was done with a conservation easement, and there are actually five separate easements. And the Conservation Commission, I think in some ways, isn't really even aware of them, meaning that it is a system which doesn't seem to work from either end. And it's one of these things where Lenore ends up saying, oh yeah, I all of a sudden discovered there are conservation easements out there. People know that they're on their property, but there's no one who's out there enforcing them or anything else. So it's one of these things where it's a regulation which was a nice idea at the start or when it was done, but it hasn't been used apparently in how long? I don't know how long.
Well, so there are two different things. One is a conservation easement that's been around for a long time. That's something that people put on their properties, whether
Right.
it was a conservation subdivision is different.
Right, this is the
Yeah.
conservation subdivision
Yeah.
that the Orchards was.
No.
I don't know the answer to that. I just know that
No,
it's two different things.
Basically, Patent Corp did that to try and make themselves look better.
Right.
But it's a regular subdivision. When we're talking about a conservation subdivision, we're talking about a cluster ordinance, basically. And that was not a cluster ordinance, but it was a regular subdivision with some of the areas protected by conservation easements, which I think, as Peter said,
Is held by the town.
yeah, and probably nobody knows it, and I don't think we would do it again if that was what we were doing.
And I think we can get away from the concept of cluster. That's a whole different thing. Conservation subdivision defines a flexibility allowed. It doesn't have to look like grapes. It could look like a New England town. Just,
Okay, it's not a standard lot by lot subdivision.
Okay, Tavis, can you send the December 21st?
Just did.
Okay, thank you.
You have it for your bedtime reading.
Yeah, and Roger, if you think that you want the committee to get together, would you let me know, and we'll set that up?
Yep.
Okay. Otherwise, this needs to be discussed by the planning board before we can bring it to a public hearing. So when can we do that? Could we do that in March?
I would think we'd want to wait till the zoning amendment season, because it can't be acted upon until a year from this March.
Well, we're just discussing it, right? All we're doing is discussing it with the planning board.
Oh, Yeah, I thought when you meant holding the required public hearing in March.
No, the first thing we've got to do is have a discussion with this group.
Yeah,
And I was sort of looking at mid-March. Is that okay with everybody?
And in response to what you said earlier about discussing the things that we were trying to do last year, I think we should go through them and at least look at what we wrote and find out what was objectionable about them. I mean, I see short-term rentals back in here, but I don't see all the other things about, like the C2 district and some of the things that were just housekeeping. I don't think they were all bad things. Somehow it got blanket negativity. But I think we should look at what we did and talk about them.
I've had just, passing in the public, because people see me every day, and you say something about, they were like, well, there were some really good ones in there, they'd say, we didn't think they were all bad. And my response in my head is like, why did you vote no then? But some of the people are like, well, yeah, that was a good one. It didn't explain it much. So I think maybe we should revisit each one of those and, turn it over again.
Okay, well, do you want to go through that now?
Have you got the list?
Yep.
Nobody else does.
Okay, well, the proposed zoning amendments was a definition, which we can probably put that aside for the time being. The C2 district, and something in the shorefront, including the accessory dwellings, but we've really already dealt with that. And then the multifamily.
I think the multifamily was the one that brought
Right.
the most controversy.
Yes, yeah, I think so too. And then the accessory dwelling, we wanted to make some changes to that, but that was, I don't know how people feel about that, but.
I think most people were very confused, because even now they're using the words interchangeably. People are still confused about what it is, how long we've had it, what is it supposed to be. It needs to be talked about with the right words, because they're switching the words around as to what's what. So that there needs talk.
Okay, well, does everybody want to discuss that?
I think it would be handy to have a list of what the things were, and so that we could all read them.
Okay, well, that's what I was going through right now.
No, I know, but you're just reading them to us. It's kind of hard to process them that way.
I think what Vaughn's proposing is if we each have a list of last year's warrant articles and bring them to a later meeting so we can discuss it.
Okay, well, that's what we're trying to do tonight,
Yeah.
okay, because that's what came up last week.
Yes, but we don't have a list of those items.
Right. So I'm trying to get these things moving ahead so that we can have time to come up with whatever proposals we want to make for next year.
Well, we need to have the language to talk about. That's all. Just let's get the list out to each person, and so we can discuss them.
Oh, okay, well, I've got the list right here. I'm assuming that most of you must have it.
Well, we don't have
We
it with us, though.
don't have it in front of us.
Okay, but that's what we talked about last week. Okay, so, okay, all right. So do you not want to talk about that? Is that what we're saying?
No. No, we want to talk about it. We just want to have the paper in front of us.
So you want to talk about it at a later meeting?
Right. Once we have a copy of what it was that was on the ballot.
Okay, well, all right, I really sort of thought that's what we were trying to do tonight.
Well, it's just too bad we don't have those papers.
I would think that one of the primary things we should do, although we may never use it, is to make a definition of a short-term rental
Yep.
and I think that there was one meeting a while ago where Roger had a very good reason why that's not necessary. At the same time, if there is a definition, then you can use it or use it as part of something else. And I just think that that's something which was asked for by the people. It was actually, as I think Vaughn suggested, it was voted down last year. But I think it's something that we really need to deal with. And if we're not, and I think as a board, if we're not dealing with short-term rental visibly, we are going to run into criticism, in part because it is so ever-present in other communities around the lake, around the other states around us, and so it is one of these things that we need to be looking at in some way.
Well, Peter, don't you remember also we were told, and I think it was by the lawyer, and not just short-term rental definition, but in one of the other ones, there was a definition, that if we don't have a definition, we can't regulate it.
That's right.
So that has to come first before we can even really do anything about what was brought up at any of those committee meetings.
And that's on this list. And
Yeah,
we're going to
there-
have the list here in about 2 minutes.
Yeah, there was another opinion, though, that if we come up with a definition of short-term rental, then we're required to regulate it.
Right.
So it's a challenge to come up with a definition without the regulations that would go along with it.
And
Well,
that's...
yeah, but if it's just a definition of what is it, you don't have to do anything with it. It is. The definition is. It's like with the definition of a dwelling. The definition just sits there in the definitions.
My interpretation of the comments was that if you have a definition, you're defining a use. And if that use isn't listed as an approved use in some district, then it's by definition not legal in that district. So it would essentially ban short-term rentals unless you define it as an allowed use.
Or the flip side, because it's not mentioned anywhere you can do it,
I,
because it's not a thing. No? Got the finger. He said no.
Thank you.
I would like to suggest that the first thing we should do is come up with a licensing agreement, decide whether that's going to apply to all rentals, short-term rentals, because we're getting things like one example is a house on the water with a 2-bedroom elderly septic system that is advertised as available for 10 people. And if we do a health ordinance, there's no grandfathering, or a licensing agreement, there's no grandfathering. Under zoning, there is. And I think the first step should be a licensing agreement, which the selectmen would have to adopt, but I would suggest we prepare it. And then I think if you're going to define short-term rentals, then you need to regulate it. And I think that should be the second part, where you do a definition, you decide where you want them. Do you want them everywhere? Do you want to limit where they can go? And that goes in the zoning.
Okay, if that's how people want to proceed, that's fine with me. Tavis has put together the ordinance. All it needs is for me to send a memo to the Board of Selectmen and ask for their thoughts.
I think that needs some work.
Well, I'm just looking at that one specifically, Article 5. This is just the language. It doesn't even show the definition that we came up with. This just says, are you in favor of something? It doesn't even say what the definition is. So I don't even know how we discuss it.
In some ways, I wouldn't know how to vote on it.
Right.
Well, it says you're amending the definition word section of the ordinance by defining the term. And the ballot doesn't spell all of this out, and this is what the ballot says. But I think the way it was drafted, nobody could understand it. But I think if you do if you're going to define it, you need to decide where you're going to allow it.
Oh, okay, well, that's what we're trying
that
to
would be
decide, Roger, but you just said that needs more work by this board. Is that how you want to proceed?
Let's work on it.
Yeah, I think we need to address short-term rentals.
And I think we should look at the.
Do you want to proceed on sending something to the selectmen to see if they're interested in licensing?
I think we should put together a draft document. I mean, here's what, I believe this is what you put together.
Yeah.
It could be, it looks like that.
And you go over that and see if that's what we
Okay.
want to do and whether it says what we want.
Okay.
Just to be clear, Roger, you're saying that the planning board should review that before it goes to
Yeah.
the select board?
Yes.
I'm saying that, yes, I think we should do a two-step process, and, maybe I'm wrong, but it really does affect land use, and I think the selectmen would be happy if we put something together and presented it.
Okay, well, that's what we're trying to do.
You want to put
And
together
what you're saying is that you want this board to look at it. I totally agree. How about if we do it at the next meeting?
Yes.
And I think we should also look at the short-term definition that's not here, like what actually the definition, it had to do with 30 days or more, I recall, but I don't see it here, so I think we should discuss that, so we can
Okay.
come up with a
Well,
definition.
The warrant article questions never have the full width and breadth of what's changing. So this year, I hope people understand what the shorefront regulation changes are, because it's not going to be all listed in the question. So that's sort of not the most effective way to look at the question. The question is never going to have, we want to create a definition, and here it is, and now what do you think about it? That's not how warrant article questions get put together.
No, but as a planning board presenting the articles, we should have the articles to look at, to discuss, not just the language that went into.
Okay, I didn't have time to print out the voter's
No, I'm
guide from
not-
last year.
I'm not-
So the topic is short-term rentals. I have gotten a lot of suggestion from NHMA and others that it is not really a zoning issue for the same issues Roger brought up with grandfathering, et cetera. The most effective way to do it is to look at a licensing program that would be implemented and adopted by the selectmen, not subject to town meeting vote, things like that. Given the two-pronged approach, I think the selectmen would likely rather have a more complete draft to look at when contemplating it. So my suggestion is 2 or 3 of you volunteer to have a short-term rental subcommittee to sit down and look at what it would look like, because, trying to write an ordinance with 7 people in a public meeting can get confusing. So if there's something that's put together and people can look at, and then we can come up with a recommendation on how to proceed, I think that's,
You mean you want a committee to look at this that we're going to send to the selectmen?
yes.
I sort of thought that the board should look at it.
I think the board should endorse what the committee comes up with to go to the selectmen.
Okay, what do you, how do you
Similar to
folks-
conservation subdivision is where I'm going.
How do you folks feel about that?
I'm okay
Fine
with
with
that.
me.
Yeah, fine, fine with
Okay,
me.
you want a committee to look at it and then bring it to the board?
I don't know if I'd call it a committee, but I'd say.
Well, that's what
a
he just
shorter,
called it.
the people that feel very, very strongly and have the time,
Okay,
committee.
all right.
Yeah, but also, do we still have to have the definition?
I'll call it the rough draft that is created defines what it is.
So does that go into
In
zoning?
order to have a license, I mean, it's just like driving a vehicle. Do I need a driver's license? Well, you need a driver's license if you're going to be doing the following things. So it says a short-term rental is as follows. It
But
would be in there.
will
If
it
the
be
planning
in
board
the
wants to
zoning
change it,
regs?
we can change it.
But if, I want to say is the license is going to the select board, I mean, to the selectmen. But the term, short-term rental, does that still have to be in the zoning regs, in the zoning regulation book?
It would be in the big book of regs, but it wouldn't necessarily be a zoning term, per se.
If we're going to regulate it under zoning, then it would be.
Correct.
And I think if we want to allow them every place in town, then it wouldn't necessarily have to be there.
Well,
If we're
what
going
I'm
to
saying,
limit
Roger,
where
is
you can have
if
them.
we go like this and give it to the selectmen, then it doesn't stay in the zoning.
That's right.
Right.
So you can't have both.
No,
Yes, you can have both.
I think what Roger is saying is that you would need to define the term, but not define it as part of the zoning regulations.
So
But you would
basically do their work
define
for
it
them.
if you did the two-step approach. if you're going to
You
regulate.
could establish a licensing paradigm, and then in the zoning, you could say a short-term rental is allowed in C1, Pine Hill, Bay Street, but not rural agriculture, for example. But the whole licensing thing is dealt with through.
That would not address where you're going to allow it.
Correct.
So you have a document, will we have a shared version so we can see what it is?
Yeah, what Roger has in his hand, what I did was take hawkers and peddlers and adapt it to short-term rental. So all it was putting the words in short-term rental as opposed to hawkers and peddlers.
Okay, can we
'Cause
get a copy so we can look at it?
I don't think that draft is particularly helpful to everyone. Obviously, I can get it to you, but I think where we're going is different from what that is. And I think it would be cleaner and less confusing to have a better document put together.
Not that one.
Correct.
Okay, who wants to be on this non-committee committee? Okay. Okay, Roger?
I'm willing to do it. I'm willing to do it.
Okay, and I'll be on it then, okay. Anybody else?
No, because if you do it, it's a whole meeting.
Yeah, you don't want to get a quorum.
If you have a quorum, you've got to.
Okay, so, all right. Okay, so the three of us are going to meet with Tavis, come up with something, and then come back here. And we're going to do it pretty quickly. Right?
Yeah,
Okay.
Let me ask one question. In terms of rental, are we going to limit this strictly to short-term rentals or all rentals?
I
don't
think that's
think
up
you
to
can.
us.
Well,
I don't think you
thought
can
it was
say anything about rentals.
Anything under 30 days was what we discussed last year.
No, I think, Vaughn, what Roger is suggesting is, would this apply to long-term rentals as well?
As in a leasing or licensing.
Yeah, I don't know.
Really think
I'm
you
not a
can do
licensed
that.
person.
That to me is almost a selectman level question to figure
Yeah.
out what they really want to regulate.
Okay,
I
and
mean,
that's
if
probably,
somebody's been doing month-to-month rental forever, I'm not sure all of a sudden they're going to want to say, wait, now I have to get a license to do that. But that's a,
okay, but we'll discuss that
Okay.
and then come back here.
Yeah, I mean, I was just looking for guidance, not,
I get it.
Okay, all right, you all have last year's list. So the first one was the accessory dwelling unit. How would you like to proceed with that?
Well, I think without having the language, it's not possible to discuss these because it doesn't describe what we're voting on.
The whole option was looking at having a detached accessory dwelling unit.
No, I know, but it had more language than what's in here.
yeah, weaken the ADU. I would not go near that. If you want to get people upset, tell them that all your neighbors are going to have another dwelling popping up on their lot.
That's just your opinion, Roger.
Well, that was the opinion of over 1,000 people, and I don't think when people come out and vote something down 1,000 to 400 in a town that virtually has never defeated zoning ordinance like that, the best approach is to decide that the people didn't know what they were voting on. That doesn't seem like a winning formula to me.
You may be right, but they also voted down the C2 district language as well.
But the reason the C2 district got voted down was because there were so many amendments that it was not, if you were opposing this, it was not possible to try and get people organized to pick and choose individual ones to vote for and individual ones to vote against. And the most effective way to defeat the ones you really disliked was just say, vote no, and it worked.
Yeah, well,
yes,
so
sir.
we don't know what people liked or didn't like. It varied by the individuals that we heard from.
Right. We don't know how many babies went out with the bathwater.
We don't,
Correct.
no.
But the other interesting thing, not that I'm suggesting the board needs to look at detached ADUs, but I would suggest board members look through each of the zoning districts and see how many zoning districts have no problem allowing a duplex. And the philosophical difference between permitting a duplex but not allowing a detached ADU is perhaps philosophical, but perhaps there's something to that. But 2 units on a property is 2 units on a property.
But there's a difference between one structure and two structures that are inhabited.
I understand, and maybe that's the justification for throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I don't know.
Do we want to put this on the list to discuss at a work session? Accessory dwellings,
I don't.
okay?
I do. I think people just didn't understand it the way that it was written.
Okay, anybody else want to?
I'm still in favor of the concept. There were a lot of people who were saying, my children can't afford to live in this town. A lot of people, and some, relatively well-to-do people. Well, if they're willing to put a 30% size structure on their property within some distance of their house, I can't remember what our numbers were, then they're regulating their own property. It's not as if you're just throwing another one back in the corner next to your neighbor. It has to be near your house, behind your house. I think we really should look at that. And it's a self-policing situation. You're not going to do this to your property.
I think there's really two things going on. What does the board want to work on versus what does the board think it might want to put on the 25 warrant? Those are two very different discussions potentially. So I think,
Okay,
if it's going to be on the list to discuss, then the next step, painful as it might be, is to go through and come up with some sort of ranking as to what gets tackled in what
that's what
order.
I'm trying to.
I know, I'm trying to help.
Trying to get to. Peter, how do you feel?
I think we need to look at things in a way that we can get things done.
Can't hear you.
You got to get.
Mike?
We have to work in a way that things get done instead of spinning wheels. And it may be that, we can move some of these things forward. I believe that the detached dwelling unit is a good idea. And it may end up being that some people misinterpreted it. But as Vaughn suggests, there are people who can't live in Wolfeboro anymore.
Well,
Their kids could.
I just did plans for somebody who, she's the older mother. She's having to move to Wolfeboro where they can do that. So they can put the second portion of the house on the lot. Instead of having them come to Wolfeboro, they have to go to Wolfeboro.
Okay, I'm trying to continue down. And Doug, how do you feel?
I think it's worth discussion.
Steve?
I agree.
Okay, Brad?
I think it's worth discussing. I'm kind of leaning with Roger about not really, right now, putting it toward the 25 warrant, but willing to discuss it, just see where it goes, and, for future dates anyway.
Okay, and Julie, I pretty much know
Yeah,
how you
let's
feel
finish
about
this.
Okay, all right. That goes on. Are you keeping track of these
Yes.
as far as the calendar is concerned?
No, I'm not even looking at the calendar because that's almost impossible at this point.
I think you almost need a gold star right there for what you're doing right now.
We need to know what we're going to look
Three
at
lists in
before we
front of
figure
it.
out when we can look at it.
So
Yeah.
what I'm doing
Yeah,
is
okay.
taking your agenda, and when you discuss it, like short-term rental has 3 names, and it says come up with a committee date. C2 district removal seemed like something that people were willing to discuss and didn't have a problem moving forward, so that's circled, not underlined. Detached ADU is on the list, but not given any sort of priority.
Okay. The other one, next one, well, let's see.
Those changes to the affordable housing.
The short-term rental is the next one. Definitions, which that will come along. C2. And multifamily is here someplace. And the inclusionary zoning. So it's the multifamily dwelling and inclusionary zoning. So how do people feel about multifamily dwelling? Do you want to have a discussion about it?
I think you almost just fly on the wall. I think you need to, because after the public hearing on the petition amendment, the board
Right.
said, let's
Yeah.
revisit it.
Yes.
I don't think Article 9 is written as the way to revisit it, but I think the board needs to take a fresh look at
Is this the one that
multifamily.
we were trying to rearrange things in the
Instead of
ordinances?
having a standalone section, take
They
those
put it into the
exact
thing.
words and
Right.
put it each of the zoning districts.
I don't think anybody understood what we were trying to do.
Okay, so we've got the first meeting in April. Can we put
You
it
do have a
on there?
project. You do have one project to review, but then, yes, there should be time.
Okay. All right.
So we're
So-
doing multifamily in April, or are we doing,
And these are all for discussions.
are we discussing all of them or one of them?
No, I'm trying to spread them out a little.
So for the handout that I brought everyone, we kind of talked about Article 2, and that is a talking point for a later date. For those watching at home, when I say article tonight, it has nothing to do with the 2024 warrant. So, and this little 3-page handout, I handed out tonight, Article 2, you thought about talking about again, but didn't put any priority on it. On Article 3, that is something to talk about. I don't think it's something you can jump into. That's the inclusionary zoning.
Well, those regulations will come up as we're having the discussion about the main item, I think.
They could,
Yeah.
they could. Article 4,
We took care of.
it's
Yeah, we-
done.
we
It-
pretty
I mean,
much
it's
took
it's
care of it.
pending this year. Article 5, there's a committee working on that.
Right. Okay, then the next one.
Article 6 was just a recommendation of a definition of conditional or special use permit, and I don't think it would hurt to have, I don't think you necessarily need to have it, so that's something that could be a talking point. But my sense of things is if the board can come up with 2 or 3 amendments for 25, if other work product takes longer, the 23 Article 6 could come back just to have 3 moving forward, but it's not really required for any purpose. C2 is Article 7, so that's kind of already done. Questions going to look very similar to that moving forward. Congratulations, look at that, you already have one more article. Article 8, gone, dealt with that for this year's proposal. Article 9 looks very confusing. If I were voting and not knowing anything, I probably would have said no, because it's a lot of Roman numerals and who knows what's going on. There are easier ways to do it. The question may not get shorter, because the question actually does go through the mechanics of every section that's changing, whether it's being amended or deleted or added. But I think there's a whole multifamily discussion the board can have before deciding what that
Yeah,
question looks
And I
like.
think that should be a priority.
Right. So I circled that on the agenda, just to
Okay.
revisit multifamily.
Okay, and we did talk about inclusionary zoning, but, that's been in the regulations for so long, nobody has really ever even thought of using it, so.
Correct.
We probably can put that one off unless somebody has a strong feeling about it.
The only guidance I would give the board on that is there seems to be a lot of discussion at the state level about workforce housing. It really doesn't say workforce housing in our inclusionary zoning, so it's quite possible if some big developer came to town and said, I want to do a workforce project, that the planning board wouldn't have any real ability to regulate it because of the state protections that are in place. So one thing that we might want to look at moving into the inclusionary zoning, in addition, we're looking at adding affordable, but also workforce. No, people are not calling regularly wanting to come in with workforce housing projects in town. Typically, they want to put that in an area that has water and sewer. And as you know from all your reviews, there's really not any land with water and sewer that's vacant for a project that size.
Okay, so you're suggesting affordable workforce housing and inclusionary.
Yes,
All-
or
all-
including all of those under the
Yeah,
guise of
okay.
inclusionary, yes.
Okay, how do people feel about that?
I mean, the ordinance does address workforce housing and elderly housing already.
Yep. Says affordable workforce housing, yes. I don't know if that would hold up against what the state is allowing people to do. I think it's a compare, contrast, and see if there's any work to be done discussion.
Okay, that probably should go a little further out and see what the state is going to come up with.
Yes. Currently, Article 4A is the overlay district for affordable nonprofit housing for the elderly and affordable nonprofit workforce housing. So what do you do with a for-profit workforce housing program?
So I would say, yes, it's worthy of discussion.
You probably can't afford it.
Well, ironically, it's the nonprofits that can't afford it.
Right, yeah, right.
I mean, it's not really
part of what the
funny either.
problem is.
It gets to be a point where, and that's only just for fun, whether it's worth revisiting or not. The overlay district, affordable nonprofit housing for the elderly and affordable nonprofit workforce housing is currently allowed in the village residential, in the C2. That doesn't exist. So if nothing else, B has to come out of that section or replaced with a zone that actually exists. Looking at it literally refers to the next section down in density and phasing, refers to the C2, the GDA, the VR, and the R.
Those are real old.
Right. Well, I think technically it's supposed to be read as the C2 GDA, but still it doesn't exist. And it's allowing density at 2 units per acre. So in the commercial district, it's holding the density to the same as the residential district, which in the vast majority of the residential district has no water and sewer. So things just don't seem to align, or maybe they do. I wasn't here when they were written. But they were last touched in 2009, so it seems like a revisit might be in order. Just a thought.
Okay, the only other item that we took to the voters in 2023 was lots without frontage. And that was really just to make it a little easier for people, clearer.
Yes. There seemed to be a lot of concern raised that somehow the ZBA was being denied visibility,
Yeah, right, right.
as opposed to what I heard the planning board say with it's really a function of planning, not something that should be warranting an exception, but
So does
That's up
anybody
to the
have
board.
any interest in looking at that again?
Yeah, it's another one that we should just tie up because it's old and needs to be fixed. But Tavis, when these
We should
articles,
tie up, what do you mean?
a little bow, like we finished it, we fixed it. That, I think, yes, we should look at it again. Tavis, when these articles are written and they go to the voter, and I know they have to be put in a certain form that these have been put in. Is there ever a place to say the purpose of this article is to, with a sentence, and then it starts into, are you in favor of? Is that ever a thing, or am I just imagining that in my brain?
You mean an executive summary?
Yeah.
well, that's the voter's guide. So in fact,
But for some reason, I thought, I'm in there voting like this, and it said the purpose of the blah, 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 and then I read it. Isn't that right?
so something I was just speaking with the town manager about last Thursday. They said, you remember when you used to be able to open the town report and it would have the question and then it put everything below it? And he said, yeah, why did that stop? And I said, I don't know. This is the first place I've worked in New Hampshire where it seemed to exist for about 400 years and then stop. So we're looking at making that change. It
So
might, So you have to remember, when I first came here, the questions were already, like, I came just as everything was already set to go to the warrant. And the next year was the first year for both Kathy Carpentier and myself. That was the first year that zoning article questions went to DRA as part of the warrant. I don't think DRA even looked at the language, but the format that is used to get to DRA doesn't let you put in all of that. So I quietly raised the question, well, why isn't it going to the town report with all of the detail in it? So if nothing else, someone can show up to vote and have the town report and say, oh, yes, I went through that, that's fine, let's vote for it. So we're going to try and get to that next year. The short version of that is I put together the voter's guide that had the question and then showed everything underneath it. It's one more piece of paper.
It's on the
Arguably,
town-
some
on
people
the
still
town
didn't-
website and in our TV performance.
Correct. So this
Right.
year, if you look at the planning board site, there's the voter's guide that has the question, shows the track changes. I just, before this meeting, updated the link so you can watch Kathy and I go through it on TV, because that's fun. And then there's just the language by itself. So you can only put so much information out. What's tricky, even with this year's article, there's really not a purpose statement. But if you look at this year's question, it says generally the topics that are covered.
I mean, I think putting that in a town report is a great idea, and it was done for years and years and years. And my wife's theory was that at some point they were told the voters thought it made the warrant too long. Because it was also on the warrant when you went in, it was all.
Yeah. So I get the idea that the warrant may still just be question only, because it really is just a Scantron sheet where you fill in the bubble. But there's no reason that the town report doesn't have it.
But it's going to be on, but the town report shows the warrant. So if it's not on the warrant, then how do you get it in the town report?
I believe it was under the planning director's annual, no?
Now, historically, it was part of the warrant, and actually it was.
I mean, I have no
can remember
problem.
seeing it on a bulletin board.
Yeah.
But,
All the more reason not to have 10 articles. Because that would be a huge warrant. You'd read 4 pages and fill in the blank and keep going.
But are you talking about some sort of a purpose statement?
No.
Well, the language that guides the question, I know you heard lots of opinions on this. All of the questions from last year were vetted by your legal counsel to see whether they were legally correct for what the question was. I sent the questions and I sent the voter's guide, and they said, yes, those are appropriate questions for what's changing. It's very clear for the public they want more detail in it. How much more detail, that's kind of a qualitative statement. So generally for the first one, actually, the Article 2, as it's written, already has more in it than the base question, because it says with allowance for detached accessory dwelling units. So the whole purpose of this article would be to allow for detached accessory dwelling units. We can deal with the questions later.
Okay. All right, but because I think it's a very good point.
Yes.
Okay.
And I would say there's plenty of time in the schedule, especially starting in almost March, looking for next March. There's plenty of time to have more hearings. If it's not clear, let's move. Even if it's not the requisite hearing, we're going to have a hearing on the warrant articles. This is what we're thinking. This is what it looks like. Does anyone have any questions?
Can that happen, like if, we do it and we have 3 for a hearing, and we're kind of thinking that nobody showed up, and one's really questionable? Can you push that one to the next one so it has 2 hearings? Is that something that's done? Or is a hearing a legal thing and then it's done?
No. Well, there is a required hearing you're obligated to have in order to go to warrant. That doesn't mean you can't have more prior to.
And I think we have done that in the past.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, meanwhile, back to the list.
So the things that I've heard raised somewhat to the top are short-term rental, multifamily housing, and C2. things that can, I mean, C2, there's really nothing to do, that's just getting the question back and ready.
Right, we really don't need to talk too much about that, I don't think.
I think we just
No,
have to
but
agree to do it.
I'm keeping it in mind as, in terms of number of potential questions.
Okay,
So conservation subdivision is not too far away from being able to be discussed by the board. Short-term rental and short-term rental, there's a subcommittee that will start working on that. And then maybe at the next meeting after the public hearing, we can start a discussion on multifamily housing, where to go from here. That's
do
actually quite a solid list.
Can we do manufactured next? Because I think that term is like really out of date at this point, and it seems like to me it kind of fits in with, you know, the short-term rental and that sort of stuff.
Manufactured is something I'm going to need some time to put together a presentation so the board is aware of what the state calls it and what
Yeah.
it means at the state, and then what our ordinance.
The more we hear
Means
about it,
to.
the more it's like, we're way behind on that, something's wrong, or we're using the wrong words.
okay, but multifamily is on the list, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, all right.
I have manufactured underlined, but I think that's going to be a longer discussion.
In the summer?
Yeah.
Okay, what about the impact fees? We could put that off until summer.
Did we ever find out about that second part of the report that we were going to pay for, and the guy retired, and then all that stuff? Did we ever finish up on that?
Well, the second part of the report that the guy was going to do, and then he retired, and he had some recommendations, and he recommended a consultant that you hired who came up with a report on impact fees. Remember that, ADG?
I don't remember about what he came up with. It was a while ago.
Basically, it was review what you have and make sure it's doing what you think you want it to do. And then that led to the discussion of, well,
What's it supposed to do?
where and how are the
Oh, and then the
monies?
question was to the school. That's right, I remember the question to the school.
Correct. So the
Been a
question
while.
is, do you really, does the town still want to have impact fees? Question one. If you want to have impact fees, do you still want them only going to offset the school tax, or do you want to implement them for other things? And if so, what and to what degree? It could be a very long discussion. In the same meeting I was having with the town manager about the warrant and getting the town report to show the questions, I mentioned impact fees. I said it might be helpful for the planning board if the selectmen said, gee, on average, we receive this amount of money, which has X amount of impact on the tax rate. It seems consistently X number of new homes are built a year, which means consistently X amount of dollars. Should that be a greater number? From the selectmen's perspective, should we be raising Y amount versus X amount? And then the planning board could have a hearing and raise or lower the impact fee amount. Maybe you broaden the definition. It also accounts for any residential addition that adds bedrooms. So, that's just a spitball. Because right now, they're only collected when a new home is built, not when an existing home is torn down and one replaces it, just when there's vacant land that now has a house.
And only for the school district tax,
And only for the school tax, correct.
which now the school is built, do we still have to do that?
Okay, well, seems like we still should have a discussion about it.
Sure.
So that everybody's on the same page.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was a master plan recommendation of a committee that Kathy and I were on, was to see whether they were doing what they were supposed to and whether they were realistic.
One of the reasons, what I read into master plan update being on this list was,
Right, and that, yeah, and Peter's going to
Peter's
speak to
doing
that. Right?
Yeah, Roger was talking about other stuff, so I didn't know it was me. For the past 3 or 4 years, I have been going through what previously been done in the master plan. If it's done, it's a 4. If it's in process, it's a 3. If it's being talked about sort of and might go somewhere, it's a 2. And if it is talked about and is sort of not going anywhere, it's a 1. And over the period of time, there has been a very large increase in the number of 4s, as well as things moving to 3s and 2s. The process seems to be slowing. And I will guarantee you that we will not get this change that we had last year with a project that was a 1 that went to a 4. And it was this little place that they have ice out there and, 109. And it basically was going absolutely nowhere, and then all of a sudden, the thing was built. It was pretty amazing. And so, at the same time, what I have done, or what has been done, is I have gotten together with Linda Murray and Kathy, who seem to know everything about the town, and I then present them with the things which are in which particular category, and they say, yeah, that's now done, or that's now being worked on, or whatever. And so therefore, that's what I have done. That information is then sent to the department chairs, so that if they have more information, they said, oh, well, they didn't know that we were doing this kind of thing. Yes, we are working on that right now. That then gets added into that category. So that's what we've been doing, and would like to, I guess, do that again.
We're going to do it this year?
That was the thought.
Okay. Right?
That's what I sort of asked, and that's what you sort of agreed to, so you're stuck.
Thank you for doing it, Peter.
It's fun playing with numbers.
For some of you.
And I think I wrote down what I did last year, so it might be easier than the previous year.
Okay, so did we pretty much discuss everything that everyone would like us to discuss?
Did we discuss water and sewer issue?
We have
Well,
not.
that's on Brad's, that's on his list. He's going to let us
Stare at
know.
you.
I don't think there's a lot we can discuss until we hear back from the select board.
Right, right.
Well,
we're all just
is there a new
patiently waiting.
report? The last report that I read, it sounded like there was room in the water and sewer for new attachments, but I don't know what has happened since then.
Are we still waiting?
We're still waiting on the updated report. There is room for hookups within the system now. I don't believe it really talked to the expansion of the system to go out further to other properties and stuff. Right now, there's properties along the system that are there now, which is room to hook up into. I did find out that the Taylor home that they built that 62-bed wing up there and stuff was figured into that last report that was out. That was already figured in, as was the Harriman Hill project there that's getting ready to move forward too now.
Right.
So these two large portions that we have seen very recently have been factored into the water, sewer, and the latest information that we have available, so.
So what about properties that are already on sewer lines? But, I mean, at one point, we talked about changing things in town from maximum 2 family to 4, and the complaint was, oh, there's not room in the sewer. But I don't know that that's true.
I don't think I can answer that right now, to tell you the
Yeah.
truth. So I'd be very hesitant to say anything to that right now.
But for us to plan, it would be
Right.
good to know.
It's a tool we need to
Yeah.
know, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, anyone else have anything?
And what's the solar ordinance that's on here? We haven't talked about it.
Yes, we did. We talked about that last time, and I'm waiting to hear back from Nancy Hirschberg, who's working with some group, and that probably would be much later in 2024.
So going through the master plan briefly, it doesn't set anything for a horizon for itself. Some master plans are done for 5 years, some are done for 10 years. Sometimes they're done for 10 years and not touched for 20. But it might be helpful for the board, maybe when Peter's done with this year's stats, if certain areas seem to be X amount complete, I'm not going to throw out a number, maybe it's time for that chapter to be revisited. So because it's not expressly stated in the master plan, at least that I can find it, I don't know if the 2019 plan was a 5-year plan or a 10-year plan.
Is
I
it 10?
think they've been 10. They have been 10.
Okay, so budgets being what they are, at some point, the planning board should probably put together an anticipated budget for itself for working on master plan update. You know, whether it's, I'll say capital reserve fund, and the finance people will cringe, but something along those lines, so that steadily over time, you know, the planning board will actually have the kitty together to do a master plan update, whether it's another whole hog or, you know, maybe the master plan subcommittee comes up with some recommendations on chapters or talks with consultants on estimates for doing chapters or bulk rates if you do 3 or more, what have you. But I know we're only 5 years into a 10-year plan, but 5 years go quick.
That's right.
I don't know if we've saved money in advance before for a master plan. I think we just put it on our list and started working on it.
Right, but the whole purpose of, you know, the whole CIP master plan thought is if it's going to be a $60,000 lift, do you want to hit the tax rate with one $60,000 swing 1 year or put money aside over time?
So are you talking about things like the suggestion of a community center? Are we trying to budget for? No.
Chapter update, updating the plan itself.
All right.
And I will state that the one on the chapter on buildings, we pretty much wrote that ourselves, and I typeset that, because the rest of the money that was spent on a lot of this other stuff was just like pushing it off the edge of the table. There was help with meetings and help with, you know, not every chapter, but the chapter that I was in, we got no exterior help from that company that we were hired at all, none. So I think, yes, $60,000, just saying, oh, you're going to spend $60,000 on that, but we need to really look at that too, because there was hundreds of hours of volunteer help that went into it, but yet we paid those people over there that did nothing a lot of money. So that needs to be revisited also.
Okay, all right. Nothing else? Okay, any other, no public? And we don't have the minutes from the 13th meeting yet. So if there's nothing else, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
All right, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, all right, thank you, folks.